Hello and welcome to this session. I'm Raghav and today we are going to learn about TestNG listeners, and we will go very basic step by step and learn what are TestNG listeners, what are the types of listeners in TestNG. We will also see how can we implement TestNG listeners, and we will see how can we use them at class level and at a suite level where we can use listeners for multiple classes. And we will also look at a Selenium test example, and towards the end of this session, I will also discuss some useful tips with you. So let's get started and let us see what are TestNG listeners. So in TestNG, listeners are the components or these are the interfaces which helps us to keep the track of our test executions by providing us a way where we can perform some actions at multiple stages of test executions. For example, these stages can be during the start of a test, at finish of a test, during a success or on success of a test, on failure, on skip, and so on. And basically listeners are interfaces in the TestNG libraries. Now do not worry if you do not understand the interfaces concept so well in Java. So let me go to Google and here I will search for TestNG listeners. Okay, and here let me go to the TestNG main official website, and also I will go to the images. So before going to the official website, let me show you some images for easy understanding. Let us take this image. Yes, this is a good image where you can see. So you can see this is your test script, and your test script can has multiple stages. So during your test execution, the first stage will be test case start. Then in case it is failed, it will come here. It can be successful, it can be skipped. So at every stage we have our listeners listening to the events, and then with the help of this listener, you can perform multiple actions. So for example, at the start of the test, you want to do something. At the time of skipping or at the time of success or failure, you want to do something. For example, you want to log report or log a particular statement in the result file, or you want to take a screenshot. And also if you want that in case of a failure, the test should be retried some particular number of times. All this can be done. Let me show you some other image, and here is another image, and these are different types of listeners in TestNG. So one of the most commonly used listeners is ITestListener, and then we have other listeners as well. Let us now go back to our TestNG official website, and here do you see this? This is TestNG listeners here. So if I click here, we have come to this section where you can see all these different types of listener, and you can see these are the types of listeners and their implementation. And in this session we are going to see one of the most commonly used listeners, which is ITestListener. So you can go to the Java doc here and the documentation here. So here you can see this is the documentation, and here you can see how you can use this particular listener, and all the details are provided here. And here is the Java doc, and you can see all these methods: on finish, on start, on test fail but within success percentage, on test failure, on test skipped, on test start, and on test success. So these are the different methods which are available in this interface. So now we have already seen the types of listeners. Let us now go to how to use TestNG listeners, and we will use simple 5 steps. The first step is we have to create a new package and a new class in our Java program. So I will go to my Eclipse and I will go to my project, and you can create this in any of your projects. And of course the prerequisite is TestNG should be added in the Eclipse plugin, and TestNG libraries should also be added. And in the earlier session we have already seen how to add TestNG libraries. So here in my case, because I have a Java Maven project, I have added the TestNG in my pom.xml. You can also add jars, and all this we have covered in the TestNG introduction session. So now I will quickly go and create a new package under my src test java package. I will create a new package and name it as listeners, and inside the package I will create a new class, and I will name it as TestNG Listeners. You can name it anything and click on finish. Now The next step you have to do is you have to implement the iTest listener interface or whatever listener you want to implement. So we are going to implement the iTest listener. So in the class signature, I will say implements iTest listener. So here itself, I will say implements iTest. And if I press Control Spacebar on my keyboard, I am already getting this suggestion. So I am going to use this iTest listener from org TestNG. Okay. So now, as soon as you will do this, you will find this error here, and if you hover over this, it will ask you to add unimplemented methods. So this is one of the concepts in Java. If you implement any interface in any class, you will have to provide all the bodies to the method. So you have to implement these methods. So I will click on add unimplemented methods, and you can see all our methods from that particular interface have now come here. Okay, so this is the next step, add unimplemented methods of ITestListener interface, which we have already done. And you can also see these are all these methods which are, you can see here, OnFinish, OnStart, OnTestStarts, and so on, and all these are here. Okay, so what I will do is I will give some custom statements here. So for example, on test start, so you can see it is also getting this result argument which will store our result. So during execution, this will be the variable from where we can get different uh, so this is a variable that we can use. So what I will say is I will say syso and control spacebar, and here I will say result dot. You can see as soon as I say result dot, I'm getting so many functions. So you can say get host, get end, milliseconds, and get name, and so on. I will say get name. Okay, and before this I will print, because this should be called on test start, so I will say test started, and it will print the name. And also I will just give some star symbols here so that I can know that this particular statement is coming from listeners, just to distinguish it. And the same thing I'm going to do in different methods. In all these methods, I will copy it from here, and on success listener, again I will put this test is successful, and on failure I will again paste the same statement. I will say test failed, and then on skipped I will say test skipped, and we will also see an example in a moment. And here I will not put anything. On start, on finish, I'm not putting anything. Let me say on finish, I will just say completed, or I will say tests completed. Okay, so this is on finish. So this is at the end of all the tests, this is at the starting of all the test, and this is at test level. So on test failure, on test success, on test skipped is for every particular test case. Now we have done the step 3 as well, and now we have to create a demo class for testing. So I will use the same package, and here I will do a right click and create new class, and here I will say TestNG Listener demo and finish. So here what I have to do is let me create some functions or some tests here, and before that see, this is the annotation that you have to use at a class level. So to make this class, so to make the listeners listen to all the methods of this class, we have to use this annotation, and also you can take it from here. So you can see this is the annotation at listener, and then we have to give the class where we have defined or where we have created our listeners. Okay, so what I will do here is this is at the class level. Okay, so just above your class you will say at listener. If I press control space bar, I can use this. Okay, and in the bracket I have to say I have to give my class name. So I have to give the reference for this TestNG listener class where I have created my listener, and this is inside listeners package. So I will say listeners dot, and it is also giving me auto suggestion. So I will use this and dot class. So this is a class. Okay, so this is what you have to do. And just in case you have multiple listener classes and you want to add all to this particular class, you can use this format. You can use something like this. Inside curly braces you can put all your classes with a comma sign, but in our case we have defined all our listeners here in a single class, and that we are using here with this annotation at listener. And now we have done the fourth step. So let me create some very quick testng tests. I will say public void test1, and I'm just printing inside this test1. I am inside test1, and just I will copy and paste this multiple times to create 2 or 3 test cases. So let me just create very quick 3 test cases. This is test2, and I will say here I am inside test2, and I will say this is test3, and this I will say I am inside test3. Okay, and now to validate, let me just see, there is some issue. So this is saying, let me see, type mismatch, cannot convert from class TestNG Listener to class extends TestNG Listeners. Okay, let me just see what is the issue here. Here it is okay. Let me see, do I need to put it inside this? No, that is not the problem. Okay, so I think let me put the annotation. I will say test. Okay, and this is from TestNG, and I will put the annotation test here as well, and here as well I will say this is TestNG test. Okay, let me write it again. So this should be listeners, and from listeners I am taking TestNG listeners class, and this is a class, and that's it. Okay, so there is some problem here. When I saved it, I got a issue here. Okay, so here I have to use context. So this is on finish. So I missed this. This is context, and that is fine. Okay, so now if I go back, yes, everything is okay. There are no errors. And now you can see I have created 3 TestNG test here. And now I will do a right click here, run as TestNG test, and everything is passed. If I go to the console, now you can see it is now printing our statements from the listener. So as soon as we started, it is saying test started test1, and this is coming from the within the test. I am inside test1. Then this is again coming from listener, test is successful. Then test started test2. All this is coming from listener, and then the same thing for test3, and all the 3 tests pass. Now let us see an example for a failed test. So let's say I I will deliberately fail test number 2. I will say assert dot assert true, and I will deliberately fail it, so I will say false here. So this should come into, this should fail. Let me try to run this again. Run as TestNG test. And here, yes, we can see it failed, test2 failed. And if I go to the console and see in test2, you can see now we have test failed, and of course there was a typing mistake. I will correct it. I will go back to my listeners here, and when it fails, okay, this was a spelling mistake. Okay, so you can see it is now running for failed as well. And just in case if I am skipping something, so for test3 I will say throw new skip exception from TestNG. Yes, here, and I will say a message, this test is skipped. So let us see, and let us run it again. I will run this again, and yes, you can see this is passed, this is failed, and test3 is skipped, showing in yellow here. And if you go to the console, let me see the listeners, and you can see test3 skipped here, right? So this is how we are able to use TestNG listeners. And the fifth step, run and validate, we have already done. And now let us see how to use at a suite level in three basic steps. So you can see as of now we have added this annotation at the class level, and we will have to do this for every class wherever we want to use the listeners. Now suppose you have hundreds of class, then it might not be a very easy way to add listeners, and it might also not be very easy if you want to randomly select the classes or use listeners in some classes and not in other classes and then change the behavior. So for that we can use it at a suite level, and for that we will create a testng.xml file. Now I already had a earlier session where I have discussed about testng.xml file. So in case you are completely new to testng and testng.xml, you can watch that first, but I will explain you in a very easy way. So what you have to do is, in your class, the demo class, I will do a right click, and here I will go to TestNG and say convert to TestNG. So it will open this window, and the very first thing is you can give a location and name. So I already have a testng.xml, so here I will say this is testng1.xml. So I'm just giving a name here, and now you can create this XML file at a package level or at a class level. We will discuss both. So first let me select class, and I will just finish it here, and you can see testng1.xml is created here. And let me go inside, so you can see this is created here. Okay, and here what we have to do is we have to create this, we have to define listeners inside our TestNG. So we have to tell what is the listener that we have to use. So here below the suite I will say listeners, and if I press Ctrl space bar, you can see it has auto completed. And here again inside these listeners tag I will say listener. I will press Ctrl space bar, and you can see again it has auto completed. And here I have to give the name of the listener class, which is in my case this TestNG Listeners.java, which is inside the listeners package. So I will say this is listeners.testng listeners. Okay, so here and now you can see whatever classes you want to include, you can include it here. So for example, listeners.testng demo is already included because we created a testng through this file, and also now I can remove it from here. So this annotation I can remove from here. Okay, and I will save it, and in the testng1.xml I have already added this. So let's say we all had another class. I will copy this class. Let me just copy and paste it again in the same package, and I will paste it here again. And this is TestNG Listener Demo 2, and inside the class I will name this test as 1 2 3. I have already used, so I will say 4, and here as well 4. I will say 5 5 and 6. So 6, and let me just remove this fail statement from here. Okay, so now we have two classes, and I will include this class as well in the testng.xml. So I will copy this, and here I will say also include this, and we have defined the listener here. Now what I will do is I will run it from a testng XML file. So you can right click on the testng XML file and say run as, and you will get the option testng suite. Run it from here, and now you can see both of the classes are executed. And if you go to the console again, you can see test 1 2 3 4 5 6 all are executed, and we have listeners for all of them. Okay, now we created a testng XML for the classes. Now let's see how to do it at a suite level. I will again right click on the same class TestNG Listeners demo, and here I will say go to TestNG, convert to TestNG, and this time let me name it as testng2.xml. And instead of classes, here in the selection I will say packages, and you can see the preview has changed, and I will say finish, and you can see the testng2.xml is here. And the same thing I will do here is, now you can see it is now including the package listeners, so all the classes inside this package will be included. And I also have to define the listener, so I will copy this from my testng1.xml and put it inside testng2.xml below the suite. Okay, and here you can see we have added the package. So now you can add packages as well. And now if I run this, so you can see I have not declared or defined any classes here. But if I now right click on testng2.xml and run as testng suite, it will run all the classes inside that package, and you can see all the classes and all the tests are executed. So the step number 3, run and validate, we have already done. Let us see a simple Selenium test example. So how you will use this in your Selenium example. So for example, let me say for test 2 inside my list TestNG Listener demo class, inside test 2 I will create some Selenium test, and for that let me copy some code from one of my earlier tests. So this was one of the earlier tests we created. So here I will just copy this to declare a to define a browser WebDriver here, and I will go here and just say this. I will just explain you what I am doing, and of course if you have watched the earlier sessions you already know. So here we are just setting the property for our Chrome driver and the path which is here. So our drivers are here and Chrome driver.exe is here. So I'm setting the path to webdriver.chrome.driver, which is this, and then I'm saying WebDriver driver new Chrome driver. I will also import Chrome driver from OpenQA Selenium, and now I will say driver.get, and let me just copy this as well. So here I'm just copying this first two statements, and I will paste it here. So what it is doing is it is going to google.com, and then it is finding the text box or the search box which has the ID, which has the name queue, and typing ABCD, and then I will deliberately make a mistake. So what I'm going to do is, so I'm saying find an element by xpath at name equals ABC, and of course this is invalid, this does not exist, so this will eventually fail, and let us see what happens. So, and after this I will say driver dot close. Okay, so let us run this now. So you can I can just run it from our TestNG 1 XML or 2 XML. So let me just run it from here. I will say run as TestNG suite. Let us see what happens. It opens a Chrome browser, goes to google.com, types ABCD, and now let us see what happens. It did not go to the close statement, and here, so you see what happens is test is started here. Okay, so let me see what was this test number. If I go back, yes, this was test 2, right? So if I go to the console, you can see test 1 passed, test 1 is successful, but when it test 2 it started and then it ran our test, but you can see it is saying test failed, test 2, because there was some failure or some issue here. So this will happen in your real world. So this here I have deliberately used an invalid locator, but let's imagine that you are running your Selenium test and due to some reason it is not able to identify or find some particular locator. In that case, it will go to our TestNG listener, and wherever we have defined this failed, so it will go to this particular listener here on test failure, and then here you can do multiple actions. So for example, you can have code to rerun your test case, you can have code to take a screenshot here, you can also have code to write something in the logs or print something in the report. So all this you can do. So this is how you will practically use it. We will also see it in more detail in the coming session. So this was a very simple Selenium test example. Let me tell you some useful tips. So one of the very important tips is you can implement more listeners interfaces in your existing class and add the implemented methods. So here what you can do is, for example, this was our TestNG listeners where we implemented ITestListener. Let's say you want to implement other listeners. For example, there is iSuite listener as well. So you can also give a comma and then implement this, and again it will show an error and it will say add unimplemented methods. Click here, and if you go down you will see the other methods of the other interface as well. So you can use the same class and add all the interfaces, listener interfaces, and then create methods. So this is something you can do if you want more than one listeners from TestNG. So that is all in today's session. I hope this was very useful. I will suggest that you do some hands-on and do some more examples with TestNG listeners. Also, you can share this knowledge with everyone in your group, and I will meet you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.